America's gun control debate reignited after the mass shooting in Orlando. With thousands of Americans killed every year, what's preventing change to laws on gun ownership? And what are the roots of the country's gun culture? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Dedine Abugaida. Americans are in mourning after 29-year-old Omar Mateen walked into a gay nightclub in Orlando and shot 49 people dead. The alarming frequency with which mass shootings occur in the U.S. does little to blunt the trauma of each act. But the facts of the case raise uncomfortable questions for those who seek to defend the country's gun laws. Mateen carried out the bloodiest mass shooting in recent history despite being on the FBI's radar. He was investigated at least twice for suspected ISIL sympathies, but had no trouble buying a military-style assault rifle, a weapon that's been used in several mass shootings in the U.S. Well, the U.S. President Barack Obama says it's been impossible to pass even the most modest of gun control laws, and that's because of resistance from powerful lobbying groups like the National Rifle Association, as well as their allies in Congress. He spoke to PBS NewsHour about the issue before the latest attack and describes individuals who are unnervingly similar to the man responsible for the Orlando attack. Let's listen.
I just came from a meeting today in the Situation Room, in which I've got people who we know have been on ISIL websites, living here in the United States, U.S. citizens, and we're allowed to put them on the no-fly list when it comes to airlines. But because of the National Rifle Association, I cannot prohibit those people from buying a gun. This is somebody who is a known ISIL sympathizer, and if he wants to walk in to a gun store or a gun show right now and buy as many weapons as ammo as he can, nothing's prohibiting him from doing that, even though the FBI knows who that person is. So, sir, I just have to say respectfully that there is a way for us to have common sense gun laws. There is a way for us to make sure that lawful, responsible gun owners like yourself are able to use it for sporting, hunting, protecting yourself. But the only way we're going to do that is if we don't have a situation in which anything that is proposed is viewed as some tyrannical destruction of the Second Amendment. And that's how the issue too often gets framed.
Well, no matter which way you look at it, the number of gun-related deaths in the U.S. are high, especially when compared to the rest of the world. Americans make up less than 5% of the global population, but they own more than 40% of the world's guns. More guns mean more gun deaths. The U.S. has more gun homicides per capita than any other developed nation, around 30,000 people each and every year. A recent study showed that more than 30% of mass shootings around the world happen in the U.S. Assault rifles, originally made for the military, are used in many of these mass shootings. And the gun that was used in Orlando was an AR-15 rifle. There are 5 to 10 million of them in the United States. All right, let's bring in our guests for this discussion. Joining us from Hartford, Connecticut via Skype is a national security analyst at the Defense Research Institute Tapestry, Scriven King. From Lexington, Kentucky, we have the former president of Students for Concealed Carry, David Burnett. Joining us from New York is the executive director of New Yorkers Against Gun Violence, Leah Gunn Barrett. Welcome to you all on Inside Story. Scriven King, so within hours of the Orlando mass shooting, we saw the debate start. Democrats calling for gun control, Republicans blasting what they call radical Islamic terrorism. So does this massacre in Orlando expose the need for more gun control or more counterterrorism?
I think we need to have a really frank discussion about what it is we wish to achieve here. I think that for too long in America, we've adopted a mentality that that prevention trumps mitigation. wherein we believe that we actually have an ability to prevent these things from happening. And due to the simplicity and the basic nature of these attacks and the tools that were used, my feeling is that it's not a matter of if anymore, but when these attacks will occur. So I'm not quite sure if there's a one-stop solution such as gun control that will work effectively towards an end to this.
Can you zone in a little more, though? What, in your opinion, is the solution then?
I think it's going to have to be a much more balanced approach. I think we're going to need, obviously, there's going to have to be a discussion about gun control. The president made some salient points that individuals who find themselves on no-fly lists certainly should also warrant further scrutiny for weapons. That also being said, I'm not quite sure that that would necessarily prevent all mass shootings. As a matter of fact, what we learned from Brussels is that it doesn't matter if you have a working firearm, if you have a demilitarized gun, a gun that does not work anymore, if I can get the parts to interchange in that weapon, it can still function. So perhaps, restricting just firearms would not necessarily bring the mitigation that we wish it would.
David, you heard Barack Obama speaking a short while ago, and he's blaming the National Rifle Association and the notion that he's attacking the Second Amendment for him being unable to regulate guns. Is he right?
Well, I would be interested in hearing from the president as well as from any other gun control advocate. How do we intend to force terrorists to comply with gun control laws? Terrorists, by their very nature, are not people who comply with laws. Second, if gun control laws were to be the solution to this, then clearly we wouldn't have seen the terror attacks and the massive bloodshed that we saw in Brussels and in Germany and in Paris. So clearly gun control laws
But David,
are
when
not
you have
necessarily the problem
372
here.
mass shootings in the United States, and that's just in 2015, killing 475 people, surely you would think that the government needs to take steps to make it harder for what you call these terrorists to obtain guns.
In allowing concealed carry and allowing firearms in America, clearly there are some negative aspects to that, but there are positive ones as well. And the FBI, the United States government, has found over 40,000 self-defense instances with firearms every year. So the reality is that, again, this club was a gun-free zone. Law did not permit this terrorist to carry firearms there, and he disregarded that law. So I think that people in the gay community are understanding that they're on their own. They were left on their own for 3 hours. They were waiting for police. They were waiting for somebody to come and get them, and nobody did. So the reality is that we have to understand that this isn't about politics anymore. This is about self-defense and about survival. I don't understand how if we change the laws, short of wholesale confiscation of every firearm in this country, which is impractical, how are we going to force terrorists to comply with new firearms laws?
Leah, I see you shaking your head at what David has to say. And also, before I ask you to respond, I'll just read out this statement that New Yorkers Against Gun Violence put out. And what you have said is that what made this act of hatred so deadly is the nature of the weapon used, designed by the military for the military. And we make it far too easy for angry, hate-filled individuals to legally obtain these highly lethal weapons. The fact is that this shooter did obtain these 2 weapons that were used in this attack legally over the past week.
Yeah, I mean, Florida is often referred to as the gunshine state. It's ridiculously easy to get a firearm in the state of Florida and in many other states. Really, no questions asked. The club was called Pulse. If you basically have a pulse, you can get a gun in the state of Florida. Now, military-style assault weapons, AR-15s, they're identical to the M16 rifle. They were developed, they are absolutely identical. They're semi-automatic. They fire off rounds very rapidly with high-capacity ammunition magazines. They are designed to kill efficiently and quickly in battlefield situations. They do not belong on our streets, in our nightclubs, in our movie theaters, in our schools, in our malls, period. And, countries that have taken action, like Canada, like Australia, to remove these weapons, to restrict them, from civilian hands have seen dramatic declines in mass shootings. In fact, there have been no mass shootings in Australia since the 1996 Port Arthur massacre. You know, and the NRA, look, let's be clear with who they represent. They represent gun manufacturers. Gun ownership in America has been declining since the 1970s. It's now 32% of American households, when in the 70s it was over half of American households owned firearms. They see their market declining, so they're pushing new products, and they're calling military assault weapons modern sporting rifles, which is ridiculous. They are nothing of the kind, as we saw in Aurora, in Newtown, in Tucson, in Orlando, and time again on the street of Colorado Springs. On Halloween morning, a guy was walking down the street with an AR-15 and immediately killed 3 individuals. He couldn't be stopped by police because it was legal to open carry in Colorado Springs. And also, don't forget, there was an armed security guard on hand at the nightclub who was unable to stop this terrorist with a gun.
Okay,
he was American-born. Don't forget, he was born in the United States.
Let me just bring in David for a second. So is the NRA the problem here, David? And who is the NRA representing? I mean, are they really representing the Second Amendment, or are they representing the industry that they make their money from?
You know, I cannot speak on behalf of the NRA. I'm not an official spokesman for them.
I'm not asking you to speak on behalf of them, but what is your opinion?
My opinion is that gun purchases and concealed carry permits have been increasing and smashing records year by year, and yet violent crime is at one of the all-time lows that we've seen in recent American history. And again, I have to return to my previous point. If gun control was the solution, then how did the Paris terrorists sneak their guns past those gun control laws? Now, I do agree that there is the possibility that, you know, an armed person can take out one armed guard. You can ambush someone. I'm not here to say that guns are the solution to every problem, but on the other hand, my opposition needs to admit that guns are a solution to some problems. If someone inside that club had been responsibly armed, responsibly carrying, it doesn't have to be a civilian. It could be one of the bartenders. It could be a designated driver. There's no reason to say that that would have not stopped the shooter.
Scriven, just back to the point on the NRA.
And I also have to take exception with the idea that
yes, go on.
Can I just say something?
I have to take exception that you can just
Okay,
walk
let me
into
just, David, please continue David, go ahead.
Let me finish my point, though. Let me finish my point, because it's not true. I need to take exception with the fact that you can walk into a gun store and purchase a firearm, no questions asked. There are a multitude of laws on the books that require you to go through background checks, submitting fingerprints. In my state, you actually have to go to the range and prove you can responsibly shoot a firearm. You have to sit through an 8-hour classroom exercise, as well as background checks from the state and the national authorities. And you also have to fill out a questionnaire. So you have to be completely law-abiding. And the reality is that, again, short of confiscating firearms from every law-abiding citizen, there's no way of actually enforcing this. Furthermore, I'd like to point out the San Bernardino shooter, who was also motivated by the same ideology, circumvented the laws by having someone purchase a gun for him because he knew that he could not pass the background checks.
All right, Scriven, I'll come to you in just a moment. Let me just have...
in this country as well.
Right, Leah, go ahead.
Our federal gun laws are full of holes. You know full well they are. New York has tough gun laws. Connecticut does. Florida is pathetic. So are most states. This guy can get a gun from a private sale, no questions asked, from the internet, from a gun show. There are myriad ways that people on the terrorist watch list can and do get firearms. He was an angry young man who had a problem with
most of them illegal.
gay people.
So how are you going to create a law on the books to circumvent that?
Because you close the private sale loophole, as New York has done, you require every person buying a firearm to purchase it through a licensed dealer, to undergo a background check. Is that going to stop all gun deaths? No, but it's going to stop some.
Just like it worked in Brussels and in Paris.
All right, hang on. Let me just bring in Scriven for just a moment. Scriven, so can you weigh in on this debate? And do you believe that passing additional gun control laws, will actually reduce gun violence?
Sure. Let's be clear about a few things. The Brussels attacks were committed by terrorists who didn't smuggle in functioning firearms. They smuggled in weapons that had been totally demilitarized. The parts in them no longer worked because Brussels had a ban on firearms. So what they did was they went out to a little country called Slovenia, I believe, and got these demilitarized guns, which you can bring in. They're like toy guns, but they're replicas that don't function. And then you interchange the parts that no longer work with working parts, and suddenly you have a working gun. That's why I'm not sure a one-stop solution for mass shootings and with banning guns for mass shootings necessarily works. Another point of clarification, the AR-15, while it is identical in appearance to the M16, is not the identical weapon. As a matter of fact, the AR-15 is like many other firearms in this country. It doesn't fire rounds rapidly. As a matter of fact, it's illegal in most places if you don't have a federal firearms license for the weapon to go to automatic. It has to have a sustained rate of fire, which means you press the trigger each time you need it to fire. You can make the same rate of fire on any other firearm. So the idea that somehow it's much more deadlier than any other firearm is a bit of a misnomer.
Leah, I see you shaking your head.
I'd love to see the
Go
autopsy
ahead.
photos. Yeah, I'd love to see some of the autopsy pictures of the children in Newtown and these people. Look, an AR-15, you can get off 30, 40 rounds in a matter of seconds. All right, so the military prefers, may I finish? The military prefers to keep their guns on semi-automatic, not fully automatic, because it's easier to control the shot. They can still get off spray fires and kill multitudes of people in a matter of seconds. And getting back to your point about there being 40,000 self-defense usage of guns, where is that in the database? I often hear this repeated. You know, John Lott, who's the most discredited academic out there, claims that his hard drive crashed with his evidence of guns being used in self-defense situations. He can't reproduce the data. You know why? Because it doesn't exist. Guns are far more likely to be used and are used in homicide, suicide, and unintentional shootings. Oh, well, what's your source, and why don't you publish those 40,000 instances?
Let me ask you this, Leah, hang on 1 second.
If guns made America safer, we'd be the safest country on the planet.
All right, let's just look at legislation for a second. Leah, in your opinion, Leah, what do you think is trying to be achieved through legislation?
Well, first of all, don't allow people on the terrorist watch list, as President Obama said, buy firearms. That's a no-brainer. If Congress is so incapacitated that it can't even do that, then really, what's the point of having a government in the first place? That's number one. Number two, close the private sale loophole, as New York has done. Make sure that every gun sale has to undergo a background check, a federal background check. Number three, I think we need to restrict military-style assault weapons and make sure they don't fall into civilian hands, and high-capacity ammunition magazines. These have no place on our streets. They're not sporting rifles, they're certainly not self-defense weapons, and they're not hunting.
All right, so if
let's go
enforced,
back
David,
to sort of being rational.
If enforced, David, how effective would these methods be?
That's the question I'm raising. If you ban private sales, which is essentially a law on the books that allows, say, a father to sell a handgun to a son or a rifle or pass it down through the generations, how are you, if you create a law on the books, you're just creating another law that the terrorist is going to violate on the way to his target. You know, there's this misnomer that you can impact the behavior of the non-law-abiding by passing a law. How are you going to make it difficult to get the gun? Again, we've seen mass shootings in countries that do not allow concealed firearms.
Let's make it easy then, as we currently do.
We've seen terrorists who are willing to circumvent the law. And I think that it's kind of a red herring to talk about the AR-15. You know, would it have made us feel better if he had used a .22 caliber handgun? These are questions that don't really have a place in the debate, except that they are being promoted as part of an agenda. Absolutely. Handguns,
no, the AR-15s
we've been very fortunate in this country so far when it comes to mass shootings, because...
David, let me ask you this. How can...
You know, the AR-15 is referred to by trauma surgeons in the United States as spleen shredders. When a person was hit in the ankle and they died from an AR-15 round, what these bullets do is they travel through the body and destroy organs as they go. They're unlike a normal, 38 caliber handgun, which my brother was murdered with, by the way, with a hollow tip bullet, which destroyed his brain. But an AR-15 round is far more deadly, and these were going at rapid fire, hitting people multiple times. They didn't have a chance. Their bodies were shredded. Do you happen to know what that means?
David, let me just ask you this for just a moment.
I agree that was a terrible situation.
Let us just look at the system for a moment here. I mean, this is quite a heated debate, and there are people on all sides of the story. But how can a system, David, be set up that is efficient, that doesn't inconvenience the lawful gun seller, but make sure that the U.S. is doing the best background check possible?
Well, again, this is the question, because this individual was law-abiding up until he wasn't. And in fact, he passed multiple different background checks and was working with a Department of Homeland Security contracted security company. So, you know,
You also have
I'm
domestic
again, I'm
violence
just perplexed, and I
convictions.
realize I'm repeating this question over and over again, but how would new words put on the signs on the doors or new words in the laws? You know, I'm a critical care nurse, so if you want to talk about trauma surgeons or if you want to talk about the problems that we see every day, I see the damage that is caused by hard drugs in this country, all of which are illegal. So I'm aware that terrorists are always capable of smuggling in guns, smuggling in drugs. We need to think about something besides adding a new law to the books that a terrorist will just circumvent by buying or stealing or circumventing the law.
But here's
and
the
that
thing.
solution does not involve taking away
what about
firearms
Dylan Roof?
either
Here's
from
the
the gay community,
Right.
from the LGBT community, or from the law-abiding, from the peaceful Muslims who may now be the subject of reciprocal hate attacks in this country. I'm hoping that's unlikely, but my message to them and the LGBT community
Is arm themselves?
no one is necessarily going to protect you. You need to be able to prepare to fight back.
Scriven, Leah mentioned Australia a moment ago, and Australia did outlaw assault rifles and semi-atomic rifles, as well as shotguns, and the fact is that it hasn't had another mass shooting since its laws changed, and that was in 1996. So is there something that the U.S. can learn here from Australia?
Sure, there's a few things that are at play here. I'll give an even better example. In my 10 years that I was in the military, I spent some time in Idaho, where over 83% of the population, I believe, owns a firearm. We had probably a tenth of the number of gun-related homicides that the city of Chicago has had this summer. That said, you know, there's a bit of culture at play here, and you know, David raised a really good point about will new laws bring about any significant amount of change? And I'm not quite so sure if it will or not. There are some underlying issues that exist in our cities. And let's just be really honest here when we discuss the violence in our cities. This has been going on in the inner cities for quite some time. We just never called them mass shootings before. And so I'm concerned.
Yeah, we have.
No, we haven't, ma'am. I lived in the Bronx, and we've never called
actually,
them.
Congress says anyone 3 and more killed is technically a mass shooting. That's the definition by Congress. It used to be 4. So those are mass shootings happen all the time. In fact, there were several yesterday in addition to the Orlando one.
All right, Scriven, just go on, please, just for the sake of time. Scriven, can continue your thoughts.
Place in places that forbid concealed carry of firearms. 99% of mass shootings take
people
place.
a day.
Scriven, please go ahead and continue. We're just running out of time on the program. David, Leah, just 1 second.
Yes, my point is that while I certainly agree that they will cause a change, I mean, anytime you enact a law, there will definitely be some sort of reduction. I'm not quite sure until we remedy the cultural issues, that which drives violence of any kind, will see any measurable difference.
Leah, you don't agree?
Yeah, well, look, it's availability. You know, we're no more violent than any other nation in terms of the numbers of crimes committed. What distinguishes the United States is the easy access to firearms. I mean, it's as easy as that. Come on. This is not rocket science. You don't have to be a genius to figure it out. It's too easy for people to get their hands on a firearm, and it should be hard to get your hands on a firearm. Whatever happened to the well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state in the Second Amendment? To me, the Second Amendment is actually moot because Judge Scalia said in 2008, Heller decision, that gun regulation is fully consistent with the Second Amendment. Second Amendment has nothing to do with this, and it has everything to do, when the NRA brings it up, with gun sales. It's about profit over people's lives. And it's time the American people stand up and say, common sense, decent regulation, keeping guns out of the wrong hands, be they of children, terrorists, angry people, domestic abusers, which this shooter was, by the way, is something that we should all agree to as a civilized society. And that way we'll reduce gun death and injury. Will we eliminate it? No, because we have too many guns in this country. We should also be focusing on smart gun technology, having guns that only can be fired by the user to cut down unintentional shootings. Children die every single day unintentionally.
All right, in the last 15 seconds, David.
We're tolerating it.
Last
There's
15
so much
seconds,
we need to
David,
do.
please go ahead and respond. You have 15 seconds.
Yeah, I'm not the NRA, so I can't address. I wasn't even talking about the Second Amendment. I'm a son. I'm a brother. I'm someone who wants to protect my family and protect myself. Coming in and trying to take the gun out of my closet because a terrorist circumvented the law is not the solution. We can't expand status quo and expect to get something different.
All right, I'll have to leave it there. We've run out of time. I do apologize, but thank you very much for speaking to us on Inside Story. Scriven King, David Burnett, and Leah Gunn Barrett. Thank you very much, and thank you for watching. You can always see this program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, you can go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From myself and the whole team here in Doha, goodbye for now.